Thank you everyone for being here tonight to support Mitchell Giddings Fine Arts, all our artists, and to meet and welcome artist Chuck Olson. It's been a serendipitous ride for us. Chuck and Marie walked into the gallery in May. Petey and Chuck began exchanging emails, and we were struck by the richness and vitality of his paintings, and an exhibit seemed destined to happen. Mitchell Giddings and the Olsons went about their respective business. While MGFA curated, framed, and hung the work, Chuck shipped to Brattleboro from Pennsylvania. Chuck was leading workshops in France and opening important exhibitions in galleries in Italy and Pittsburgh. Then last week, Chuck opened a solo exhibit in West Virginia, and next morning at 6 a.m., Chuck and Marie set off for Vermont. We have copies of Chuck Olson Visual Histories available. Several of his paintings in this exhibit are included, and there are excellent, insightful reviews as well. Olson is the recipient of numerous honors and awards and has taught for over 40 years. His paintings have been featured in over 300 solo, group, and juried exhibitions throughout the United States, France, Germany, Italy, Bermuda, Scotland, and Japan. It's been our pleasure to get to know Chuck Olson and an honor to premiere his work in Vermont. So ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome Chuck Olson.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to come. It's always a pleasure to talk about this work, because I think when an artist is asked to do so, the artist has to check in with himself or herself about motive and way of working and ideas and how they generate. So I thought I'd start by talking about how I work. And I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I live near Pittsburgh in a town that if you've seen It's a Wonderful Life, it's Jimmy Stewart's native town of Indiana, Pennsylvania, which he told Frank Capra must look like Indiana, Pennsylvania, and they changed the name to Bedford Falls. So that's where Marie and I live. And in that context, I have a studio that is the old boardroom of a very large bank from 1905 with a big skylight and an architecture that tells me I must do something today. I designed a space that would sort of speak in the imperative voice so it would get me to the studio. And I'll talk a little bit about motivation and about how I developed these, but I want to talk about sort of a search for images. And the title of this show, these selections, is Object and Memory. And in any artist's search for images, there are interesting paths. And how we as individuals accumulate shape, form, texture, color as we go through our day, whether we're artists or not. We collect all of these different forms and different shapes. I taught art history for 40 years, and art history was such a store for me to run through in terms of idea, always changing, always learning new things, accumulating concepts. And the way I work in the studio, and it's the credo that I always gave to students, that what you must do is you must show up. You have to show up every day, and every day some. And within the studio, I would go, Marie and I would have a schedule when we had children that I would work in the studio at night. But sometimes if we want to go to a movie later on, I'll go up for 10 minutes and I'll make one line on one canvas with a piece of charcoal. That tells me that the studio environment has changed. There's a nuance in the studio. And so as a jogger jogs, and routinely works out, I think artists must do this as well. You go to the studio. And the way in which I work and develop work, it's sort of evident in this show. I usually start with small pieces like this to develop different kinds of imagery. And I'll work the small pieces to a certain point, and I'll work maybe 25 or 30 of these. And on one large wall, I will push pin them up onto a drywall like a calendar. And so that there's no subjectivity, I will start with Sunday. And my credo is to do one thing that improves where it is. Just one. That gets me to the studio. I don't go to the studio with a heavy agenda. I go to do one improvement, one thing. That gets me in the door. And then I will build a body of work in trying to come up with new concepts, new form, color, texture, the different elements of collage that I put into them. Once I feel that there is gravity here and a direction, then I'll have my carpenter make me around 25 canvas frames, anywhere from 3 foot by 4 foot to 8 foot by 9 foot. The show that's currently in Pittsburgh is largely canvas, largely 6 by 5, 6 by 6, 8 by 9 foot canvases. And then I take these ideas and I start working on them. I never make a maquette to do a piece again. It's just whatever inertia is generated here will then apply to canvas. Then I work exclusively on the canvases. And when I feel those canvases are finished, now I have more information. I go back to these small ones and the paper pieces with that knowledge and finish the whole body of work. Within the course of a year, that probably accounts for about 50 pieces per year. And then when I do a show, I want to edit that down, and I want to work with people, fortunate enough to work with people like Petey and Jim to put together a show like this. And that is my routine, that is my daily routine. Every day some. The way in which I look for the images, a little bit about my motivation, because that's something that I'm always interested in when I meet people that have done incredible things. I want to ask, what's your motivation? If I met Willem de Kooning when he was alive, I would say, how do you stay hungry? And what motivates you? What's creating the itch to go back to the studio? And for me, history has always been one of my great muses. That I read a lot of nonfiction. I love archaeology. I like antique stores. I like things, shards of things and pieces of things, because they hold my curiosity. And there was an English critic, Graham Shearing, who worked in Pittsburgh and then worked in New York and worked in London, who wrote the preface for this book that's here. And he made this interesting statement in one of his writings about reviewing a show of mine. And I think it's very important that we realize that the artist doesn't know everything about the work. That we must have the opinions of others, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But Graham, in an attempt to his readership, to get folks to try to understand what is Chuck Olson trying to do here, Graham said, it's as if you're walking along the beach and some morning and there's shells and different matter at your feet, and you see one that intrigues you. And you bend down and you pick it up and you look at it and you put it in your hand, and it's right in your hand, and you have this confrontation with this curious thing that you've paused to pick up. And for some reason, you put it in your pocket, and it continues with you and goes to the rental and goes to the car and goes home, and you don't know what to do with this, but it winds up in a drawer. You just can't throw it away. And you can't throw it away because it's your curiosity. And to throw it away would be to throw away your curiosity. And he said that that what Chuck Olson tries to do is to hold you at the moment when you pick up that shard and look at it and make that moment heroic. Because as in talking with Graham later, I said, yeah, because that is the moment that you are between, as I said in my statement for the gallery, that you are between having the wonder of a child and the intellectual curiosity of an adult. And you can shift back and forth. I had mentioned in the conversations last night at the opening, this idea that a French writer talked about a pocket knife being very much like that. That when you have the pocket knife closed, it is a toy, and you hold on to it and you spin it and turn it. But as soon as you open the blade up, adult responsibility. And I think the spirit of a child, but then with the idea of a switch, that you can switch a yin and yang between those two, is essential for me. And I have all kinds of things in the studio that remind me that you have to hold on to certain spirits that you had when you were younger in negotiating the creation of images. So that's a very important way, I think, to consider this, because I've come to realize that in painting, it has an effect on me like going to the gym would have on the body. That the studio is a workout for curiosity. And thinking of that we all have a biological bell curve, that creative curve could just ramp up, couldn't it? That when you look at the lives of artists and you look at the lives of people like Picasso and Miro and others, many, many others, you see that curiosity and how they've safeguarded it and expanded it. And to me, this is a goal, this is a life goal. So I feel like when I go to the studio, I'm going to the gym. To hold me there, and the way in which I try to develop imagery is that when I start with like 4 panels like this, there are so many things that come to mind. I feel that when I look at them, there's the antique market, there's the hike in the desert, there's a hike up a hill, there's an interesting door clasp. The things that if you take your day and you get out of bed and you move through the day and the colors you see and the shapes that you hold and the sounds that you hear, if you could take that and perhaps in a cubistic way, look close, look far, look for different points of view, we accumulate all these things. So many things. But then when I work, I try to create one form first. I will either put collage down first, or I'll put down a ground similar to like this tone first over the whole image. Then I comb a very thick gesso in what I think are key strategic areas of the painting. I loved making sculpture when I was a student, and I really couldn't take it with me. And sometimes I think I'm making sculptures that I could never figure out how to build. And so I paint them. And then I will put another light tone down, and I'll use a rag, and I'll wipe out what I think the composition is. I'll start looking at the sculptural form. Then I look for this thing is an important step. The next thing to look at when I look at the creation of an image is, where is my mentor in the painting? I abandoned in my 20s this naive notion that it was in me, that I had to scrape it out. But I found that I'll find an area that appeals to me. And I did that. Maybe I didn't do it intentionally, but there it is. And now it's telling me to react to it. And then I'll start to build. I'll immediately grab a dark. And I often put a dark in, as you can see from all of these. And the reason for that is that's the contradiction to the light. I love Italian Baroque painting, Caravaggio in particular. And the idea of the dark to me is the argument against this light. And I need that dialogue. I worry sometimes if I took out all the darks that are in all these paintings, might just be pretty, and that's not enough. There has to be an interesting contradiction or another way of, as if both shapes, both tones are trying to define beauty in their own way, perhaps. And once I put the darks in, I will start to develop the image, and then I go through a series of layers and layers and layers. Now, I'll reach a point where I feel that the painting, well, I just don't know what to do, right? I mean, congratulations, you don't know what to do. And so it gets put up on the wall, and then I go to this one. And as you can see through the 3 architectural ones, there were 10 in the series, and I would run them on the wall, and I would work to that point, and then I'd take the next one, ground, build up the surface, put a tone down, start to work an area. That's my mentor that's saying, work with me now with this, until that was exhausted. And then as I accumulate them on the wall, they start telling me what they want to be. For example, if I am stuck on some part of this painting might give me the answer to what this needs. I need the collective. I must work in a series. And I always think about 3, 5s, and 7s. I don't want pairs, because then it's a choice. I want the third element, and what that allows me to do, it allows the paintings I'm creating to be mentors of each other, and I need to respond to them. And so that's the way the whole show develops. That's the way the color develops. That's the philosophy that I use to create the forms that are here. And then when that develops in the paper in these, then it goes to the canvas, and I give it a similar treatment. And as I mentioned, I get my carpenter to do 20 or 30 panels, and I'll stretch them all, and I'll stack them like paper. And I have a 13 by 9 foot easel and 2 9 foot by 7 foot easels, and I slide them along the easels in a room that's about as big as this room. So I can really look at them. The other question that I often get about how do you tell when things are finished if you work this way? And I have another room where I have a large white wall, and I'll put the work from the easel room to another room. And in the studio, I can see the easel room, and I can see this other kind of display room. And I've always felt that when I walked into, perhaps I said this to you, Dan, yesterday, I walk into a museum and I see a painting on the wall, and from perhaps here to the street, and I think, that's intriguing, and I stand and I look at it, and then I want to get closer. So I walk closer to it. And when I get very close to it, I ask myself, is what you noticed back there the same as what you're seeing close? If the answer is it's exactly the same from here to there, it didn't change so much, I'll just say it's okay. But if I get there and there's a whole different concept going on, or there's great texture, or there's great light and color, then I'll think, this has got some lives in it, and it's got body. And so when I put these paintings on this one wall, I play this game of distance. Because I want to see them at 25 feet, and I want to see them at 3 feet. And I want that to be something synchronized in those two visions. And the other way in which my brain turns when I'm making these images is that I feel like it is a conversation. If I'm working a painting, and if I make a line like this, it's as if it's starting to say something else. If you take a white wall and make one line, all of a sudden the room is different, you respond to that line. If you come to the gallery and you ask me a question, we're starting a conversation. That's like a line, and I respond to it. And you and I are going to engage in a conversation that we don't know where it is going. But we will engage in that conversation hoping it's going to be interesting. We might just talk about the weather. We might just talk football. I don't know. But we'll talk to a point, but then we start to turn it towards something interesting. And so I feel I don't worry about where the painting's going, where my initial concept is, because I don't worry about the conversation you and I are having, that it'll drive itself somewhere. And sometimes I'll work it and work it and work it, and I'll lose a quality. Just like you lose a quality in a conversation. And all of a sudden you say, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to get back to what you said 5 minutes ago, right? And so how do you get back as a painter? You simplify, because you're always painting. Even when you're painting something out, you're painting. And so I'll simplify, I'll take out some of the busy things to the essential, to try to find that essential. And then perhaps the painting's done when I've held the conversation at that point. That matters. So it's a way of working. I think of color, sometimes want to think of them as sauces on how you make things. I was trained as an art education in art for kindergarten through high school. And I had this supervising teacher who was a remarkable primary school teacher. And she said, Chuck, when you buy paint, you only buy blue, yellow, red, white, and black. It's good for your budget when you're a school teacher. And you make your kits, and you only ever give the kids those colors. And what she would do when the kids would paint is if Bobby Jones made a color and it was new, she would say, let's look at the wall. And she would have a wall, and it would have how many measures of each tone to get Bobby Jones blue. And she had a Pittsburgh Paints kind of Sherwin-Williams trail of all these colors that some of I had never seen before, but the kids could then name their color. And it was remarkable. And like, I'm going to paint this. I need this background for this landscape. I'm going to paint this tree. Well, I need, Jenny's green, and I need blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, it was cooking class. And it taught me about how to think about color and how not to be afraid in mixing color. And she just broke those kids out of their Crayola trap, that all trees had to be this green and this brown. It was remarkable. And so I learned a great deal from Dorothy Jeffries back in Adams Township School. And these things you apply, obviously. The three pieces that are over here are lithographs. And just briefly, I'll mention one thing about them. There was a cooperation with West Texas A&M near Amarillo, Texas. And I was put on a list of American artists for which the project was to get, over 3 years, to get each artist to come to Amarillo and do one lithograph with this master printmaker who had this great studio on Route 66, old Route 66 in Amarillo. And we managed to do 5 prints. They're done on Mylar. They're not done on stone. They're offset lithography. But each plate was, of which there's 40 plates in this. There's some buried color back in here. Each plate is painted on Mylar using a registration system. And then it's transferred to these big photo plates. And he had 2 17,000-pound German printers. And I would mix the color, he would run a color, And then I would add another, I'd look at the proof, I'd put another sheet of Mylar over, and I'd make another plate. The difficulty in making these was that you had to think 5 colors ahead while he's printing them, so it's a chess game of 5 moves ahead. What's that going to look like, and how do we respond to it? He printed for Ed Ruscha, he printed for some Richard Rosenfeld, not Richard Rosenfeld, Rosenquist, excuse me. A remarkable printmaker. And this was our association. He passed away this year, and we managed to make 5. There's 2 more in the series. But he got me interested in working this way, and I went down to see Dan down below to see if I can come back here and do some monoprints. So within that, that's sort of how I work and how I think about how to set the studio. Perhaps it's a good time for me to see if you have questions, particular questions about the work. Because what you're seeing here is a variety of years from 2006 to 2021. It's sort of a sampling of how I work, though the very large canvases, of course, aren't here. Yeah, Jim?
Chuck, I'm interested in your vision related to the cityscapes. They're quite different. I mean, the architecture is more pronounced. And I'm wondering if, I'm wondering what your vision is. Initially, it might even look dystopian, but I'm really attracted to them.
Well, let me go back to this idea of confronting a shell in your hand. My compositions have largely always been that for a very long time. I've always felt like that there's something mythic in some of these shapes that I wanted the painting, I wanted the form to seem to know more than I did. It had a greater experience than I did. And that it weathered something, or it has a story that I can't get out of it, but I still want to hold it in my hand and reflect on it. And these I did probably it was in COVID, probably the end of 2020. And I was thinking, well, I mean, we're in COVID, right? I wanted to return to the idea of a fixed architecture, but very much like a fixed non-objective form for me, that had a story that I didn't know. You know, you told me about this fire across the street in 2013, and I imagine there were people just standing there, looking at it in ruins and wondering what was going to happen or what happened to the people there, etc. And that sense of wondering and being engaged and being fixed, because I think in almost all my work, you're center stage, fixed, front row center, almost a Renaissance point of view. And everything sort of just takes place in front of you. Yes, these are more descriptive that way. The collages come from books. I go to different stores, and if I see cheap books, or I'll buy like 6 or 7 of them. This was a Faden book on modern architecture, and I started cutting. One book gets to the shelf, it gets saved, and the other books I'll go into. And I started using them like Legos and cutting them up and making my own architecture. You know, I also have a huge set of blocks in the studio, so I can play with blocks and create things. And so I think that was part of that series. But I wanted to feel like I parked my car somewhere and I walked to where it happened, and I just stood there. You know, I wanted that kind of effect with these. But it's very similar to confronting these, perhaps, but it's more specific. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious about your creative process. So you've explained a lot about how you work now. Is this how you've always worked, or did you sort of start with like elements of this and then this is where it is today? And is it like evolving into something else? Can you kind of see glimpses of that?
I think that's a very good question. And if I can go back to my 20s, I thought I had to have all the answers, and it had to look right each step of the way. And that builds a lot of anxiety and stress when you work. It evolved. What I described to you has evolved because doing things in series gets rid of the stress. Because then I depend on the other ones that I'm not working on to teach me something about what I should do. And I'm free to sort of act. I had this large commission in Pittsburgh, for example, in my 40s. It was 7 foot by 7 foot canvases for a Blue Cross Blue Shield center in Pittsburgh. And the whole thing was purchased, sight unseen. I had 6 blank canvases. So I put those 6 blank canvases out, and I start working, and I can't work. Because behind me, this is paid for one, behind me is the team of architects, invisibly saying, I don't like that stroke. I don't like that. And my stress just builds. Call my carpenter, say, make me one more. Make me one more 7 foot by 7 foot. Why? You only need 6. I need 7. The one on the easel that I'm working on is always the one that's not going. And as soon as I would take it off the easel to work on the next one, you're going now, you're not. So I was completely free. I think as artists, we have to play games to hold our ground.
Trick ourselves into it.
Oh, well, you have Michelangelo with this idea that there's one figure in that block of stone to free, and so he's liberating this figure, and the figure can't be liberated, so that's not where it was. Done. Give me another block. Oh, he could change that. But what do what do artists tell themselves to hold their ground and to do the work? And then this evolves. And I'm so glad I left that 20-something behind, because I was in art school, do your work, turn it in, get your grades. It gets you into a routine that isn't a really free way to work. Yes, sir.
I think sometimes the desire to please people creeps into an artist's way of approaching something. I think it stems from you coming home from 2nd grade and your mother's taking one of your drawings and put them on the refrigerator. It stays there forever. And it kind of,
It's the first
at least
art
for
gallery.
me, becomes almost like approval of other people.
Yeah.
And then at this point, I don't care. And I'm almost destructive in the way I work now. And it is so freeing, which I sense a lot of what you do here.
Well, my example about the architects behind me telling me they don't like this, it's a commission, so I have to please people. When I do a commission for someone, I usually do 2, just to keep me as free as I possibly can be. I think that's a maneuver that as artists we have to come to terms with. This is kind of a smart alecky answer, but I was at a alumni event in my university about 12 years ago, and a former alum, having too much to drink, came up to me and said, "How come you're still here? How come you're still here? Why are you still here?" And I just said, "So I don't have to paint your dog." It gave that this job is protecting me from pleasing you because I can you know, with what the institution's paying me, I can get by. And that allows me to paint what I want to paint. And that's another trick. I mean, that's just one of those things that you do to try to move yourself through all of this. And I find that's the kind of conversations I want to have with people that, you know, if I could sit down with de Kooning or Richard Diebenkorn, I'd say, let's talk about this. You know, what's got you hungry? And also, I think doubt is really important. I think doubt is essential. Heroic doubt, which I call it heroic doubt. It's the idea that you try something, and when you have doubt, you have youth in your work. When you have doubt, you have an element of youth because you're into something that you're not sure of. I mean, you don't want this out of your surgeon. but as an artist or a writer or as a musician, certainly. And as you work, I have this thing about, you know, my students would get frustrated in drawing class and they'd scream and like, I can't get this. I said, call your parents and say congratulations. What are you talking about? Well, you've just run into your education. You've run into the thing you don't know. And that's what you're here to find out. You're not here to go through and get a 4.0 and learn nothing and just be absolutely clean all the way through. You have to fall down, you have to learn how to get up, you have to fall down. And because that's the thing you don't know. And I think all through our artistic lives, we have to have that spirit. Because I think there's great youth in that. And I've come to learn through those students too, that there's two kinds of, there's the biological youth that's based on date of manufacture that's on your driver's license. And then there's the idea of being youthful with things. You're 80 years old, you start to garden for the first time. The seeds come up, you're elated. You don't say, oh, I thought that would happen, I'm 80 years old, I have all this experience. My wife bought me a guitar when I was 48, I had never played, and this is what the guitar taught me, was that when I could play a chord cleanly, I was genuinely excited. I was like, hey, you know, raising my voice. And I thought, that's what a 14-year-old would say. You know, when you do something for the first time, you're young with it, and you have doubts. And I think it's very important to have those things. Because if you cement those all in, then you tend to just make copies of your best stuff. And it starts to erode. You know, so you have to take those risks. I'll come home, Marie will hear me complain about how bad it was all day in the studio. And it takes about 24 hours, and it was really bad. You know, I got beat up really bad in the studio. I come home, tail between my legs. The next day I realize, you got something going there. You got something going there, and I'll just, you know, pick yourself up. There's something you don't understand in the studio. Congratulations. I think all that's really important, you know, in the process. But I love talking about process. I really do. I think it's essential. Some other questions? Petey?
I'm really intrigued with what I'm hearing because it's we're just getting to know each other. It's so neat because you just walked in the gallery and then we put a show together. I'm trying to read voraciously as much as I can about you. But it's really neat how I'm feeling like I'm really getting to know you now. So I'm curious, maybe you already mentioned this or went into this about when did your discipline and your bravery come into play? Was it your upbringing? What was it that made these realizations come to be?
Oh, it's a series of small victories, isn't it? It's never major. But I can tell you one anecdote that I think gave me courage. early on. When I was in college, in grad school, all my paintings were ochre, black, white, gray. I was deathly afraid of color. I hated red. I thought it was the most conceited color that was ever made. You put a stroke of red on it and it says, look at me, I'm red, I'm here, I'm pretty. I even had a prof that said, if you want to sell the painting, just put a red stripe across the middle of it and it'll sell, because red sells. And in one of those frustrating moments when you don't know how to work, I decided, I had this 4x8 foot canvas, and I thought, I gotta do something. And at the same time, I looked through magazines just to see color sometimes. I use it in collage. And there was an ad for Martex sheets, and there was this bed with these red sheets on it, and pillow, and it said, and it was talking about the walls behind it, and said, these red sheets go with gray, blue, yellow, down, 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 down. And as you're going through, you're saying, yeah, it does, yeah. Therefore, it's a neutral. So here I am, a painter of neutrals. And you're telling me, Martex is telling me that red's a neutral. Okay, what color do I detest the most? I really, really hate, and I could never, ever paint with it. And I've got this 4x8 foot canvas. Barbie pink. Walmart aisle Barbie pink. Can I take that and make it heroic? Can I make it big and pink and strong and muscular and all this stuff? Like just wrench it from Barbie and make this large form. That gave me courage. Because as soon as I did that painting, and glory be, it's sold and it's in a nice collection, I felt that I had all this color opened up to me. It could all be neutral. And my color changed. That painting's in the book. It's one of the first plates in the book, and that was the result of that dialogue I had. And it's like risks in conversation. If I have three of these architecture things going at the same time, I can take all kinds of liberties with any one of them. If I have one, and it's my precious sheet of paper on my precious easel with all my paints arranged, then I have to be careful. And I'm building up fear. But if I have 6 of them, or if I have 7 6-foot canvases, I'm free. That, to me, that's the part where the stress gets pulled out, is the upfront. You know, they say, like, your food health happens at the grocery store and what you buy. It's the same in the studio for me. What do I buy in materials and how do I lay them all out? You know, gives me that. But that's sort of one of the ways I go through that. Other questions?
I have another, but I don't. If someone else has one before me.
Please.
What is your relationship to your pieces now? Like, is just the process of making them like enough, or do you feel like, oh, I want to sell it, but I don't want to sell it at the same time?
Oh, okay. The selling thing.
Like not losing a painting, but like it leaving your life, or
it makes a vacuum, and I fill the vacuum by making another one. I'd like to see it go to a good home, but I don't know where they go all the time. Sometimes they do, you know. But something I really, really like, here's my fear. If this is my precious, all right, and I don't want to sell it, then this is becoming my new dictator who's going to say, like me, like me, like me, like me, like make it like me, make it like me. If it gets sold and gone, and I have this vacuum, I'm going to work again. I have an opportunity. There was a famous potter, Toshiko Takeyezu, Japanese, who, when she would do a piece that she couldn't sell, she put it in a closet And she had these pieces in a closet that were her, and she would rarely look at them, but she put them away and locked them up. She didn't want anybody to see them. And then when she lost her courage, she would open the closet and look at. But we do things, you know, to make that happen. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes.
I really like the values you have, and you use dark values a lot, and you draw, or what I would describe drawing. You're unafraid of putting a black line, or
Yeah.
putting dots or something, and it appears, maybe I can clear this, are you forever drawing or doing calligraphy or mark making even to the end?
I draw on everything. You know, I'm on the phone, I draw. I have sketchbooks in the summer where I just draw. I'll do a drawing of a lake or a tree stump, or, you know, gathering in the material. Drawing is literacy, is visual literacy. And being able to sort of configure those things in the initial stage, or get a feeling for that texture to then translate into paint, is one thing. But the other thing, what you're referring to too, is like this charcoal line or that charcoal line. For me, that is where something happened that is just all we have is a trace. As if this was here and moved. Or it's also a debate, maybe. Maybe, but you need some discipline, but you don't need thick paint. You just need a line. You need a laundry line to run through it, so that this is permanent, and this is heavy, and this is capricious. It's just a little sentence that runs in the back, but it adds structure without the weight. You know, but it's interesting to think of these things this way, to sort of move through with these different tools. I have big palettes in my studio on rollers, and I never clean the palettes. If I was a watercolorist, I would clean palettes, but I never clean the palettes because to me it's all, I don't want to delete this information. Some of them weigh 70 pounds because some of them are this high in paint. And if you cut through them, you see all these layers. But for me, it's information. I don't want to wash it away, but, you know. And my brushes, I water them like plants. They look like arthritic fingers. They have all kinds of paint on them. I think you have to like your materials. I think that's important too. And the other thing about the studio is I feel that you must have something to do in the studio that's not related to art. I have guitars in the studio now. I have games in the studio, not video games, but chess and other kinds of games. I have a hammock, a place to take naps. I have a corner in my studio. I have this, what I call my boxer's corner, like where my bucket and stool would be if I was fighting somebody, and where I can see everything. But it's where the computer is, all the books, guitar, futon, hammock, oriental rug. This is like the safety zone. But I can turn and I can look at everything from there. Matisse always said that a studio has to be a garden. And you should treat it like a garden, like any workspace. You're an accountant, whatever you are, like a garden, so that you want to show up for it. And there's things to imagine there. So there's all kinds of temptations in my studio. The other thing I do is I read books when I paint. I have audible books I learned from my kids with Harry Potter. I kept up with them but I could listen and I could paint. So I tend to read books. I'm reading 9th Street Women right now, that way, while I paint. It's great hearing stories of Helen Frankenthaler and Joan Mitchell while you work. And then I'll write down ideas from those books in my sketchbook, so that all that folds together. And then I can mine ideas out of that. Yeah. Other questions? Petey?
actually it's two, but I'm curious about whether you ever embed letters, numbers, or anything like that into your surface at all, into your language.
Letters and numbers. I've done that with collage with French newspapers. The series in Pittsburgh right now is all these comic books. I found these books on comic books from Taschen and other, and I would cover like a 6x6 in comic book. I don't like comic books, they're cultural wreckage. But then what I'll do is I'll construct a form that is my form on top of this, almost like contempt for the comic. And I'll use things metaphorically like that. Sometimes numbers really grab you. To me, they're real attention getters, and I think they're pretty powerful. I kind of stay away from those. But I know that de Kooning used to use a letter to start a painting, like the letter N. Let's do this, and then get started. Start letter P, and just get started, you know. I had mentioned to someone last night, we were talking at dinner about creative stages. And one of the things I learned in college that I always liked was that there are 3 stages to the creative process. The first one's initial, where you have you overcome inertia and you start. It's due tomorrow if you're a student, so you start. Or you start because I'm going to start. And there's some X amount of energy in that takes you into the next stage. And the next stage is huge, it's enormous, it's really big, and you don't really know how big it is, but it's called hell. Because that's what it looks like, and that's what you feel like. And sometimes you have enough energy from the initial stage, it takes you most of the way through, and you just have to tie up a few things to get to the third stage, which is solution, but sometimes the inertia just drops you off at the border of hell, and you've got all these things to go through. The hell stage is where you learn everything. And a lot of the painters on TV, or the ones that try to teach you to paint landscapes that you've never seen, there's no hell stage. What they do in a half an hour is they take the hell stage out, and you go from initial to solution, like bacon and eggs. It doesn't have that difficulty. It's not real marketable. And my prof told me you have to learn to love the hell stage. That's where it all is. Oh. You had a second question?
I do. I'm wondering how, because I know you're also a musician, how music is informing your work, or whether it does, or...
I was always jealous of musicians because they organize time. And artists don't organize time. They organize space. And the music, maybe Marie could answer that better as an observer, but the music to me is an energy source for all of this. And some of the difficulties I've had with music I can translate into this. Or the lessons learned in music I can translate into painting. But music is, I think about your passions as domestic animals. That painting for me is owning an elephant. It's big in a small house, and I've got to feed it and take care of it and wash it and love it. And it's big and it's messy. And music for me is a cat. it's a cat. We have a different agenda than the elephant, But it gets me through thinking about them that. But it's a vitamin. It's a vitamin for the studio, I think. Yeah. Other questions? Well, I want to thank you for being here tonight and giving me a chance to say that. I would like to thank Petey and Jim again. And you have such a great resource here in Brattleboro. It's just, this is a jewel and run by wonderful people. And every time you walk by the gallery, it's here. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.